Tell us about CRP. Tell us more about this organization.
Well, we started in very humble dwellings, in 2 go-downs, 2 storerooms in the front of the Shaheed Shurawadi Hospital in 1979. That had been sort of 3 years in the making. It had taken us 2 years to get the government permission to start a centre, and a 3rd year to get enough funding to just make those storerooms habitable in a very simple way for spinally injured people. And for those first 11 years, we were gypsies moving from one place to another. After the first 2 years, the government hospital said, we want those go-downs. We had built a basketball court so that our patients in wheelchairs could play basketball, but they wanted those buildings. So we moved out to Dunmundi, to a rented house there for 4.5 years, until the landlord said, no, I want to bring that building down and build a bigger medical centre. So we then found a much bigger property opposite the Tesgown Tanner in Farmgate. We were there for another 4.5 years. But of course, paying rent all the time, and then at the end of the year, nothing tangible to show for it, seemed the wrong use of money. But we had to have that basic experience so that potential donors believed that we knew what we were doing or wanted to do. Then we found a 5-acre plot of ground in Sava. Over the years, we were able to add to it, so we added about another 7 acres of neighbouring ground. And we started with, again, very simple temporary buildings, corrugated iron sheet roof, just so the wards were just the width of the piece of corrugated iron, because we knew those buildings would be pulled down when we could raise enough money to build permanent buildings that were appropriate for a rehabilitation centre. And we quickly, well, as we moved with 55 patients. We quickly built up to 100. And now, with bursting at the seams, we can accommodate 130 people with spinal injuries. We have a variety of activities going on, but we do have 2 operating theatres, so very often our patients will need spinal surgery, a spinal column that needs fixing. Perhaps they come with very bad pressure sores, so they will need plastic surgery. They need bed rest to enable the spine to become stable, so there are wards to accommodate them. And then they progress to a place called a halfway hostel, which is preparing them for the big transition of going home. So in that hostel area, we purposely don't give running water all over. Half of it is for people who go back to pumping the tube wells from their wheelchairs. So we feel we want to help them to adapt most speedily to going home, and that it's helpful for them to then learn from a wheelchair to use the tube well. Half of the accommodation in the halfway hostel has electricity, half of it purposely doesn't, so it's back to the hurricane lamps again for when you go home without electricity.
It sounds like a different world, you know, because you are treating people for such a long time who are usually forgotten in the society, neglected and forgotten.
They are, and often brings quite a stigma, the whole field of disability, and it's fighting against that and equipping them with vocational training, helping them to find a job. So they go back home to their village, and people are amazed that they can set up a little shop and run it very profitably. And there they are, the person who would normally be rather ostracized and isolated, proving that they can support their families. So we feel that gradually the attitude towards disability is very slowly changing, and even now you can see newspaper advertisements for people looking for jobs, and they will sometimes say person with a disability encouraged to apply for the job. So slowly, slowly, the attitudes are changing.
This is so optimistic because, for example, I've been living abroad for like several decades now, and when I come to work, it's a common picture. I often see people in wheelchairs taking the train, they're commuting by train, coming to work, and every building has access to wheelchair and everything, and this is so normal here.
Sure.
Whereas I think it's not so normal in
You
Bangladesh.
just don't find it. And,
Yeah.
And often pavements are perhaps 10 inches a foot high, and with no ramp at all. So they are desperately limited. If you want to buy a ticket at the launch gate, the barriers are such that you just can't reach the person selling the tickets if you're in a wheelchair. So they face terrific problems, and it's these very strong, very brave people who are paralyzed, some from the neck down, some from the waist down, who go out and help to break down these barriers of the very negative attitude that the general public tend to have.
I think people often forget that it could happen to them.
Absolutely.
It could happen to me.
Absolutely.
It could happen to anyone.
Very, very much so. Very much so.